survived my fiancé betrayal not by luck, not by rescue, but by refusing to stay blind. My name is Serafina Callaway, and 3 years ago I was named the youngest CEO in the history of Callaway Biotech, the company my father built from nothing but stubborn ambition and sleepless nights in a rented warehouse in Cleveland. By 32, I had the penthouse overlooking Lake Erie, a black Amex that never declined, interviews in Forbes, and a fiancé the media called my perfect match. His name was Alistair Rowe, charming in a tailored navy suit, educated at Columbia, soft-spoken in public, possessive in private. Everyone said I had everything: legacy, power, love. What they did not know was that everything I had was already being carved out from under me, piece by piece, by the man who slept beside me every night. When I met Alistair at a biotech conference in San Diego, he introduced himself as an independent venture strategist. He spoke about innovation, long-term growth, ethical leadership, the kind of things that made investors nod and young CEOs like me feel understood. He listened when I talked about expanding into oncology research, about honoring my father's dream, about the pressure of carrying a last name that opened doors but also painted a target on my back. He made me feel safe in a world where every handshake came with hidden motives. Within a year, he had moved into my penthouse. Within 2, he had a ring on my finger, a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond that flashed under chandelier light at every gala. My father, Thaddeus Callaway, never trusted him. He would sit at the head of the long mahogany dining table in our family estate and watch Alistair with narrowed eyes. Thaddeus had built Callaway Biotech with grit and instinct. He trusted balance sheets more than smiles. He once pulled me aside and said, "Serafina, love is a beautiful thing, but never let a man near the vault if he did not help you build it." I laughed it off, called him old-fashioned, told him times had changed. 3 months later, my father suffered a sudden stroke and was gone before I could say goodbye. Grief made me vulnerable, and Alistair stepped in seamlessly. He handled funeral arrangements, comforted my mother Isolde, spoke to the board on my behalf when I could not get out of bed. The directors admired him. They said I was lucky to have such a devoted partner. What I did not know was that while I was mourning, Alistair was meeting privately with our CFO, a quiet, meticulous man named Bram Huxley, and drafting proposals that would slowly dilute my controlling shares under the guise of expansion capital. The first red flag was small. A transfer authorization requiring my digital signature appeared in my inbox at 2 a.m., marked urgent. It was for a new subsidiary, Rowe Strategic Holdings, created to manage overseas partnerships. I confronted Alistair the next morning over espresso in our sunlit kitchen. He smiled, brushed a strand of hair from my face, told me it was just a structural move to protect our assets from international tax volatility. He kissed my forehead and said, "Trust me, Serafina, I would never hurt you." I signed. A week later, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I had come home early from the office, heels in hand, moving quietly across the marble floor. From the study, I heard Alistair's voice, low and sharp, nothing like the warm tone he used with me. He said, "Once the merger is approved, her voting power drops below 51%. After that, she is just a figurehead." There was a pause, then a woman's laugh, silky and familiar. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to my cousin Marella Davenport, the only other family member with minor shares in the company. I stood frozen behind the door, listening as they discussed timelines, board manipulation, and something that made my stomach twist, a prenuptial amendment that would give Alistair access to my personal trust in the event of incapacitation. Incapacitation. The word echoed like a gunshot in my mind. I walked in before I could stop myself. Morella's face drained of color. Alistair recovered quickly, too quickly. He said they were planning a surprise for my upcoming birthday, a philanthropic foundation in my father's name. He looked offended that I would even question him. That night I could not sleep. I opened my father's old safe in the closet of the guest room, the one he had insisted I keep. Inside were original share certificates, old contracts, and a sealed envelope with my name written in his heavy handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was dated 6 months before his death. He wrote that he had discovered discrepancies in our financial reports, unexplained advisory fees routed to shell entities connected to Alistair. He had been investigating quietly. He feared I was too emotionally involved to see clearly. If anything happened to him, he urged me to audit everything. The next morning, I hired a forensic accountant under a confidentiality clause so tight it could suffocate a secret. Her name was Octavia Lennox, sharp-minded, relentless, loyal only to the truth. Within days, she uncovered a web of offshore accounts, intellectual property transfers, and a silent agreement between Alistair and Bram that would trigger after our wedding. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Once married, Alistair would push for a high-risk acquisition engineered to fail. The stock would crash, investors would panic, and he would step in with a pre-arranged buyout funded by a competitor. I would be blamed for reckless leadership, removed by the board, and left with nothing but a tarnished legacy. But the betrayal went deeper. Octavia traced payments to Morella, substantial ones. In exchange for her shares and her vote, she would help paint me as emotionally unstable following my father's death. There were emails discussing staged arguments, carefully leaked stories to the press about my supposed erratic behavior. The final twist was almost too much to bear. There was an insurance policy in Alistair's name taken out on me shortly after our engagement, justified as key executive protection. I did not confront him immediately. Instead, I played the grieving, distracted fiancé. I smiled at cake tastings, pretended to debate floral arrangements, let him believe I was still blind. Meanwhile, I called an emergency board meeting scheduled for the night of our engagement party, disguised as a celebration of a major breakthrough in our oncology trials. I invited every director, every major shareholder, and the press. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, champagne flowed, a string quartet played softly in the corner. Alistair looked radiant in his tuxedo, confident, victorious. When it was time for my speech, I stepped onto the stage, heart pounding but voice steady. I began by thanking my father, recounting his sacrifices, his vision. Then I shifted. I spoke about trust, about betrayal, about how the greatest threats often come disguised as love. The room grew silent. Behind me, the large screen flickered to life. Instead of engagement photos, emails appeared, bank transfers, signed drafts of the merger plan. Audio recordings filled the hall, Alistair's voice outlining how he would reduce me to a ceremonial role. Morella's laughter echoed through the speakers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bram attempted to slip out, but security blocked the doors. I looked at Alistair, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not the man I loved but the architect of my undoing. His face shifted from shock to fury to something almost feral. He tried to grab the microphone, accused me of fabricating evidence, called me paranoid. That was when Octavia stepped forward with notarized documents and a pending lawsuit filed minutes before the presentation. The board members whispered among themselves, calculating, distancing. By the end of the night, Alistair was escorted out under the flash of cameras, Morella in tears behind him. The board voted unanimously to terminate Bram and launch a criminal investigation. The media spun it as a dramatic takedown, a powerful woman reclaiming her empire. But when I returned to the penthouse alone, the silence was deafening. The closet still held his suits, the bathroom his cologne lingering in the air. Revenge tasted sharp and metallic, not sweet. Days later, I received a single envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photograph of my father the week before his stroke, standing outside a private clinic I did not recognize. On the back, in Alistair's handwriting, were 4 words, "You still do not know." And that was when I realized that exposing his financial betrayal had only scratched the surface, because if my father had been investigating him, if Alistair knew that, then my father's death might not have been a coincidence at all, and the man I thought I had defeated might have been only one piece of something far darker that was still watching me from the shadows. The photograph would not leave my hands. I sat on the marble floor of my penthouse, back against the cold glass windows overlooking the city, staring at my father's face. He looked tired in the picture, thinner than I remembered, but determined. Behind him was a sign partially visible, Crestfall Neurological Institute. My chest tightened. My father never told me about any neurological appointments. His stroke had been labeled sudden, tragic, unavoidable. I did not sleep that night. By morning I was in my car, oversized sunglasses hiding the dark circles beneath my eyes, driving 2 hours out of the city to Crestfall. The building was discreet, modern, too clean. I introduced myself at the front desk, CEO voice steady, daughter's heart breaking. When they hesitated, I placed my father's name on the counter like a loaded weapon. Thaddeus Calloway. After several tense minutes, I was escorted into a small consultation room. A physician named Dr. Lucian Arkwright entered, his expression carefully neutral. He remembered my father. He said Thaddeus had come in concerned about sudden migraines, dizziness, unusual spikes in blood pressure. Tests had shown traces of a rare anticoagulant in his system, something not prescribed to him. My pulse roared in my ears. Anticoagulant. A drug that could increase the severity of a stroke. I asked him directly if it could have been accidental. He hesitated. Then he said it would have required repeated exposure. Repeated exposure. My mind replayed family dinners, glasses of wine poured by Alistair, supplements he insisted my father take for heart health, the quiet way he integrated himself into every aspect of our lives. My hands began to shake, but my voice did not. I requested copies of every report. I left Crestfall with a folder that felt heavier than steel. That evening I called Octavia Lennox again. She arrived within the hour, sharp eyes scanning every document. We sat across from each other at my dining table, the same table where my father once warned me. Octavia did not dramatize things. She simply said, "If this is what it looks like, this is not corporate betrayal, this is attempted murder, possibly worse." Alistair was already under investigation for financial crimes, but this changed everything. I authorized Octavia to work with federal authorities quietly. We handed over the clinic reports, the insurance policy, the shell companies. Within weeks, subpoenas were issued, accounts frozen, travel restrictions placed. Alistair tried to contact me, first through lawyers, then through desperate late-night calls from unknown numbers. I never answered. The last message he left was not apologetic. It was cold. He said I should have married him when I had the chance, that I could have been protected. Protected from what, he did not say. Then the final piece fell into place. Bram Huxley, cornered by investigators and facing prison, agreed to testify. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he revealed that Alistair had been collaborating not just with Morella, but with a rival pharmaceutical conglomerate, a ruthless empire led by a man named Corvin Draxler. The plan was not just to steal my company, but to eliminate the Calloway family's controlling influence permanently. My father had discovered early negotiations and threatened legal action. Weeks later, he suffered his fatal stroke. The anticoagulant had been administered through customized supplements Alistair personally delivered to my father under the guise of care. The repeated exposure weakened him, made the stroke catastrophic instead of survivable. When the arrest finally came, it was not dramatic. No ballroom, no cameras I invited. Federal agents detained Alistair at a private airfield as he attempted to leave the country. Morella was arrested at her townhouse, sobbing, mascara streaking down her face. Corvin Draxler's corporation became the subject of a massive federal probe. I watched the news alone in my living room, wrapped in a blanket my father once used during late-night strategy sessions. There was no triumph in my chest, only a hollow ache. Revenge had been necessary, justice unavoidable, but it did not bring my father back. It did not erase the memory of loving a man who had calculated my downfall from the beginning. Months passed. Trials began. Evidence mounted. Alistair sat in court no longer in tailored Navy suits, but in a gray prison uniform, his charm stripped away. When he finally looked at me across the courtroom, there was no affection, only resentment that his plan had failed. The jury delivered its verdict after 3 days. Guilty on charges of fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and manslaughter linked to my father's death. The sentence was long, decisive, final. As the judge read it aloud, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not relief, but closure. After the trial, I returned to Calloway Biotech. I restructured the board, strengthened internal controls, created a foundation in my father's name for ethical medical research, this time real, transparent, untouchable. I sold the penthouse and moved into my childhood home, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of where strength is built. Some nights the silence still feels heavy. Some mornings I wake up expecting to see Alistair beside me, and for a split second I forget everything. Then I remember the emails, the clinic, the courtroom. I remember my father's letter telling me to protect what he built. I was betrayed by the man I loved, nearly stripped of my legacy, almost robbed of the truth behind my father's death. But I did not break. I learned that power without vigilance is vulnerability, that love without discernment is dangerous, and that sometimes the most painful heartbreak becomes the fire that forges you into something unrecognizable. And this time, when I look out over the city lights, I do not see everything I could lose. I see everything I fought to keep, and I know that no one will ever take it from me again. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories.